You wake up one morning, and nothing has changed. The same room, the same routine, the same faces, but something inside you feels different, not in a loud or dramatic way, but like a whisper you can't quite trace. A quiet sense that the ground beneath your feet, though still solid, has shifted just slightly while you weren't paying attention. And you can't explain why. You go through your day. You smile when you're supposed to. You answer messages. You complete tasks. But underneath it all, there's a hum of unease, a feeling that you're standing at the edge of something you cannot name, and no one else seems to notice. What if that feeling isn't confusion? What if it isn't burnout or laziness or a sign that you're falling behind? What if it's the first whisper of a transformation, so deep that your conscious mind hasn't yet learned the language to describe it? Stay with me until the end of this, because what I'm about to walk you through may change how you see every quiet season you've ever endured, and the one you might be standing in right now. Chapter 1. The Quiet Unraveling. The experience I just described has a name in depth psychology, though most people never learn it until they're already deep inside it. It's called the liminal space, a threshold between who you have been and who you are becoming. And the reason it feels so disturbing is that your mind craves certainty. It wants labels. It wants a map. But in this space, the map no longer works. Think about it. Everything in your external life may look perfectly fine. You have a job. You have relationships. You have plans. Yet internally, something feels like it's quietly coming undone. Not dramatically, not with a crash, but like a sweater slowly unraveling from a single loose thread you didn't even notice was pulled. You may have tried everything you know. You read the books. You followed the advice. You built the habits. You told yourself to stay positive, to keep going, to push through, but none of it seems to reach that deeper place where the unease lives. And so you ask yourself the question that keeps you awake at night. Am I doing something wrong? Or have I been walking in the wrong direction this entire time? Here's what I want you to consider. What if that question isn't a sign of failure? What if it's actually a sign that you're ready? Ready to stop living from the surface and start listening to something much deeper. Carl Jung, one of the most profound explorers of the human psyche, observed this exact state in countless people who came to him feeling lost, stuck, or hollow. And his conclusion was startlingly different from what most of us assume. He said that this sense of stagnation is not a breakdown. It's a breakthrough, a necessary dismantling of an old structure that has served its purpose but can no longer hold the weight of who you are becoming. Chapter 2. The Weight You Cannot Name. Let me ask you something honestly. Have you ever felt exhausted even though you haven't done anything physically demanding? Have you ever felt empty even though nothing tragic has happened? Have you ever looked at your life and thought, this should feel like enough, but it doesn't? That weight you're carrying, the one you can't fully explain to anyone, is not a weakness. It is not a personality flaw, and it is certainly not a punishment. From the perspective of depth psychology, it is something far more interesting. It is the sign that a part of you, a part you may have buried years ago, is beginning to stir. Jung called this the shadow. But let me be very clear about what that means, because most people misunderstand it completely. The shadow is not your dark side in the way Hollywood or pop psychology describes it. It is not the evil part of you that wants to do bad things. No. The shadow is simply everything about you that you have never fully seen. The fears you learned to hide because someone told you to be brave. The emotions you suppressed because showing them would have been inconvenient or unsafe. The desires you never admitted, not because they were wrong, but because you didn't think you were allowed to have them. And perhaps most importantly, the potential you never allowed yourself to live out because it didn't fit the identity you built for the approval of others. Here's what most people never realize. The shadow does not appear randomly. It appears when you have gone too far in one direction, when you have become so identified with being strong that you forgot how to be soft, so focused on achievement that you forgot how to rest, so committed to pleasing everyone that you lost touch with what you actually want. And when that imbalance reaches a certain point, the shadow rises, not to destroy you, but to return to you what has been neglected. However, before it can give anything back, it always does one thing first. It disrupts the old system you've been relying on. And from the inside, that disruption always feels like being stuck, like moving through water that keeps getting thicker, like trying to start a car that has no fuel. You do more, but you see less result. You try harder, but you feel less meaning. And this can easily terrify you, because from an ordinary perspective, it looks exactly like decline. Am I losing my drive? Have I run out of energy? Is there something wrong with me? But what if the exact opposite is true? What if this heaviness is actually the first evidence that something inside you is finally waking up after years of being asleep? Chapter 3. The Long Interior Winter. Let me take you deeper. Because what I've described so far, that heavy, nameless stagnation, is only the first layer. If you stay with it, if you don't run from it or try to fix it immediately, you may find yourself entering an even quieter phase. One that spiritual traditions have called the dark night of the soul. Now, don't let the dramatic name scare you. This is not about suffering for the sake of suffering. It is something much more precise. It is the moment when the old self has loosened its grip, but the new self has not yet fully formed. You are no longer who you were, but you are not yet who you are becoming. And that in-between space, that hallway with no doors, is one of the most disorienting places a person can stand. In this phase, the external world may look completely normal. You still go to work. You still talk to people. You still laugh at jokes. But internally, something has gone quiet. The ambitions that once lit a fire under you now feel distant, almost like memories belonging to someone else. The goals you chased so hard now seem strangely hollow. The relationships that once defined you no longer fit the same way. And this is where most people make a critical mistake. They panic. They think they've lost their passion. They think they're depressed. They think they need to find something new to chase. Something bigger. Something shinier. But here's what Jung would say. You're not losing yourself. You're outgrowing the container you've been living in. Think about a tree in winter. From the outside, it looks dead. No leaves, no blossoms, no visible growth. But underground, something is happening that no one can see. The roots are sinking deeper. The tree is preparing for a spring that hasn't arrived yet. And if you tried to force it to bloom in January, you would kill it. The same is true for the human psyche. Before every major leap in consciousness, there is a withdrawal of energy from the outer world. The motivation you're missing? It hasn't disappeared. It has gone underground to restructure the core of who you are. And the stillness you're experiencing? It's not emptiness. It's a soundproof room where your deeper self can finally speak without the noise of your old life drowning it out. Have you noticed that the most profound realizations never come when you're searching for them? They come when you're washing dishes, when you're walking, when you're staring out a window. That's not an accident. That's the psyche creating silence, so that something deeper can be heard. Chapter 4. The click that changes everything. And then, often when you least expect it, when you've stopped trying to force an answer, when you've surrendered to the not knowing, something shifts. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's like the softest click you've ever heard. So subtle that you might almost miss it. But once it happens, nothing looks the same. Jung called this the emergence of the self, the moment when the deepest organizing center of your psyche begins to enter conscious awareness. Before that moment, everything inside you feels like scattered fragments. Fear here, pain there, unanswered questions piled in a corner, efforts that seemed meaningless floating without direction. You look at it all and see only chaos, but in that click moment, something remarkable happens. Those fragments begin to find each other, not because you forced them, but because they naturally recognize their own kind, like magnets that have finally been brought close enough to snap into place. The questions you've carried for months, or even years, suddenly receive answers so simple that they surprise you. Oh, that's why I've been feeling this way. Oh, that's what that relationship was trying to show me. Oh, that failure wasn't a dead end, it was a redirection. Have you ever had an experience like that? A single moment of clarity that reorganized everything you thought you knew about yourself. Let me give you an example. I once spoke with someone, let's call her Sarah, who had spent years in a pattern of choosing partners who were emotionally unavailable. She had read books about attachment theory. She had gone to therapy. She had tried to change her behavior. But nothing shifted permanently. Then one day, during an ordinary conversation with a friend, she heard herself say something she had never said out loud before. I don't think I believe I deserve to be chosen. That sentence landed like a stone in still water. And in that moment, she realized something she had never fully seen. The problem wasn't the partner she was choosing. The problem was a belief she had carried since childhood. A belief so deep and so old that she had never thought to question it. And once she saw it, really saw it, the pattern began to loosen. Not because she tried harder, but because she finally understood. That is the click moment. It cannot be forced. It cannot be manufactured by willpower. You cannot meditate your way into it or manifest your way into it. It emerges on its own timeline, like a drop of water gathering on a leaf, growing heavier and heavier until it becomes full and falls naturally. And when it falls, you realize something quiet yet unmistakable. You were never lost. You were simply walking a path you didn't yet have enough light to understand. Chapter 5. Why stillness always comes first. Now, if you've been tracking with me so far, you might be asking a natural question. Why does this have to be so uncomfortable? Why can't transformation feel good? Why does growth always seem to require a period of confusion, heaviness, and doubt? These are excellent questions, and Jung's answer to them is both simple and profound. The psyche cannot maintain the old structure and build a new one at the same time. It must withdraw energy from familiar forms before it can nourish something new. Think about a building being renovated. Before you can put in new walls, you have to tear down the old ones. Before you can install new wiring, you have to remove the outdated system. And during that demolition phase, the building looks worse than it ever did. There's dust everywhere. Nothing works the way it should. Anyone walking by would assume the building is falling apart. But the people doing the renovation know something different. They know that the mess is not the end. It's the middle. It's the necessary chaos that precedes a new order. The same is true for your psyche. The stillness, the fog, the lack of motivation, these are not signs that you're failing. They are signs that your inner world is being renovated. And the reason it feels so uncomfortable is that your ego, the part of you that likes control and predictability, does not know what to do with this process. Your ego wants to fix things immediately. It wants a 5-step plan. It wants to see progress on a chart. But the self, the deeper part of you, operates on a different rhythm. It moves like nature moves, in seasons, in cycles, in periods of visible growth, followed by periods of invisible rooting. And the stillness you're experiencing? That's the rooting season. Have you ever noticed how impatient we've become with anything that doesn't produce immediate results? We want the download, not the apprenticeship. We want the breakthrough, not the slow unraveling that makes the breakthrough possible. Here's what I've come to understand. The unconscious only offers you profound insights when you are capable of containing them. If transformation happened too quickly, you wouldn't have the inner strength to sustain it. So before lifting you into a new level of awareness, life gently, and sometimes not so gently, removes the old layers that have been clinging to you. The person who is always hidden behind perfectionism may collapse into exhaustion so deep they can no longer pretend. But that exhaustion is not a weakness. It is the perfectionist finally admitting that they are tired of carrying a weight they were never meant to bear. The person who has always projected strength may fall into a stagnation that terrifies them. But that stagnation is a reminder that they have forgotten how to be vulnerable, how to lean on others, how to admit they don't have all the answers, how to be human. When you understand this, you stop running from the quiet seasons. You stop assuming that something is broken just because you feel lost. You begin to see that every slowing down carries meaning. Every empty space is room for something new to enter. And every silence is preparing you for a deeper movement than you have ever known. Chapter 6, The Threshold of Becoming Yourself. And this brings us to a word that may be unfamiliar to you, though I suspect something in you already recognizes it. Individuation. Individuation is Jung's term for the lifelong process of becoming who you actually are, not who your parents wanted you to be, not who your culture told you to be, not who your fears convinced you to be, but the unique, irreplaceable person that only you can become. Here's what most people get wrong about this. They think individuation means becoming better, stronger, more successful, more impressive, but that's not it at all. Individuation is not about adding more to yourself. It is about subtracting everything that was never truly you. Imagine a sculptor standing in front of a block of marble. The masterpiece is not created by adding clay. It is created by removing everything that is not the figure hiding inside the stone. Individuation works the same way. You don't need to become someone new. You need to shed the layers of who you thought you had to be. The roles, the masks, the performances, until what remains is simply you. Think about the roles you've been playing. Maybe you've been playing the role of the responsible one who never fails. Maybe you've been playing the role of the people pleaser who never says no. Maybe you've been playing the role of the achiever whose worth depends entirely on the next accomplishment. Maybe you've been playing the role of the invisible one who never takes up space. Here's a difficult question. If you stopped playing that role tomorrow, who would you be? And more importantly, would you be brave enough to find out? I once spoke with a man, let's call him David, who had spent his entire adult life chasing success. He had built a company. He had made money. He had earned respect. But underneath it all, he was exhausted in a way he couldn't explain. During one of our conversations, he said something that stopped me. I don't actually know what I want anymore. I only know what I'm supposed to want. That sentence was the beginning of his individuation. Not because he suddenly had all the answers, but because he finally admitted that the answers he'd been living by weren't his. They had been inherited. From his father, from his culture, from a version of himself that no longer existed. When he saw that, really saw it, something shifted. He didn't need to burn his life down. He didn't need to reject everything he had built. He simply needed to exhale, to stop running, to ask himself a different question, not what should I do to be successful, but what would I do if I weren't trying to prove anything to anyone? That is individuation, stepping out of unconscious commands and beginning to live from a center that is truly your own. And when you begin to do this, something subtle but profound happens. You stop comparing yourself to others, not because you're trying to be humble, but because you genuinely see that no one else can walk your path, and you don't want to walk theirs. You stop needing everyone to approve of you, not because you're arrogant, but because you've finally found a source of validation that doesn't depend on applause. Before individuation, you may have lived like a moon, reflecting light from somewhere else. You still shone, but the light was borrowed. Individuation is when you begin to radiate from within, Not like an explosion, not like a performance, but like a small, steady sun that doesn't need to prove that it exists. Chapter 7. The final question. Now I need to be honest with you about something. Even after you've done this work, even after you've sat in the stillness, faced your shadow, and begun to shed the old roles, there is one more threshold. One final test. Not because the universe wants to punish you, but because the unconscious wants to know if you're truly ready. This test rarely arrives as a dramatic event. It comes in subtle, ordinary moments. An unexpected rejection that makes you question your worth all over again. A conflict that stirs an anger you thought you had released. An opportunity that scares you so much that every old voice rises up to say, "You're not good enough. You're not ready. Stay small where it's safe." Here's what's happening in those moments. The unconscious is not trying to make you fail. It is simply illuminating the final places that still need your attention. The last fragments of the old self that haven't yet been integrated. And the question the unconscious is asking is very simple. This time, will you choose differently, or will you return to what you have always known? Think about your own life. Is there a pattern that keeps repeating? A situation that looks different on the surface but feels exactly the same underneath? That's not bad luck. That's an invitation. The unconscious keeps bringing you the same lesson until you finally learn it. Not intellectually, but in your bones. Someone once shared with me that after years of therapy and inner work, they finally felt ready to pursue a dream they had held since childhood. But when the opportunity came, they felt nothing but fear. And then they heard a voice, familiar, quiet, devastating, whisper, "Who do you think you are?" That voice was not truth. It was the final echo of an old identity trying to hold on, and in that moment, they had a choice. Believe the voice and step back into safety, or recognize the voice for what it was, a ghost, and step forward anyway. The test of the unconscious is never about whether you are capable or perfect. It is only about one thing: whether you are ready to live truthfully as yourself. And here is what I want you to know. If you are facing this test right now, if you are standing at the edge of something that scares you, you are not alone. This is how every genuine transformation ends. Not with certainty, not with a guarantee, but with a choice. A simple, profound choice to trust the self that has been quietly forming beneath the surface of your life, even when you cannot yet see where it is leading. Chapter 8. When life begins to answer. And then something remarkable begins to happen. When you stop running from yourself, when you face the shadow, when you endure the stillness, when you shed the old roles, when you pass the final test, life begins to answer. Jung called this synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that are too precise to be random, not miracles in the supernatural sense, not signs from an external force, but the natural reflection of a transformation that has already taken place inside you. Think about it. Have you ever noticed that when you finally make a decision, a real decision, from your core, the world seems to rearrange itself around that decision? Doors open, people appear, information finds you. Coincidences pile up in a way that feels almost intentional. Here's why that happens. When you are living from a divided self, when part of you wants one thing and another part wants the opposite, your energy is scattered. You are sending mixed signals to the world because you are sending mixed signals to yourself. But when you integrate, when you come into alignment, when the war inside you ends, your energy becomes coherent. And a coherent signal produces coherent results. Synchronicity is not about manifesting your desires through positive thinking. It is much simpler and much more profound. It is what happens when you stop fighting yourself. When the inner conflict dissolves, when you begin to move in a single direction, not because you're forcing yourself, but because you finally know which way is yours. Have you ever experienced a coincidence that felt like more than a coincidence? A chance encounter that changed everything. A thought that appeared in your mind and then appeared in the world moments later. Those moments are not random. They are signposts. They are the psyche's way of saying, you're on the right track. Keep going. Not because the path will be easy, but because you are no longer walking against yourself. And perhaps the most important thing to understand about synchronicity is this. It usually appears only when you have stopped needing it, when you have gone deep enough that you no longer require external validation, when you trust the path even without signs. In that moment of genuine trust, the signs often appear, not as answers to your questions, but as confirmations that the questions themselves were the doorway. Conclusion. So let me ask you one final question. Where are you standing right now? Are you in the heaviness, that nameless stagnation that feels like walking through fog? Are you in the long interior winter, the dark night, where nothing makes sense and everything feels hollow? Are you in the stillness before the click, waiting, trusting, not knowing? Are you at the threshold of individuation, shedding old roles and discovering who you actually are? Are you facing the final test, standing at the edge of something that scares you, wondering if you have the courage to step forward? Or have you begun to see the synchronicities, those quiet winks from life that remind you that you are exactly where you need to be? Here is what I want you to take with you.
Every darkness you have walked through, every stillness that made you question everything, every fear you have faced,
every layer you have shed. It has not been meaningless. It has been preparing you, quietly, invisibly, relentlessly. You were never lost. You were simply walking a path you did not yet have enough light to understand. And the light you were waiting for? It was never outside of you. It was always beneath the surface of your own awareness, growing brighter with every honest question you dared to ask, with every fear you dared to face, with every role you dared to set down. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who you were told to be, not who you thought you should be, not who you pretended to be so that others would stay, but who you actually are, in your quietest moments, in your deepest longings, in the version of yourself that exists before the world told you to shrink. That version of you has been waiting, not impatiently, not angrily, but patiently, like spring waiting beneath winter, like dawn waiting beneath the darkest hour of night.